Let me get one thing off my chest right here at the beginning. I am just a little bit salty about how the RTX 3080 launch went. There was not enough stock, bots kept breaking the websites, and the design it really looks like the product was rushed to market. These events are not how I envisioned the past couple of weeks, but here we are. But today we are allowed to look more closely at AMD, specifically their Navi 2 GPUs. We have talked a lot about the RDNA2 architecture and how it improves upon its predecessor. But today we are going to take that to the next step. We are going to walk through all of the current leaks, break down what each of them means, and we're going to actually prove that NVIDIA really does have a contender on their hands. Disclaimer, though my claims are grounded in AMD and other companies' specifications, the conclusions and how I come to those conclusions are speculative. This video is meant as a discussion piece and will be verified once review samples are in hand. To start, let's give a little bit of a background. RDNA2 is AMD's latest GPU architecture, and AMD is yet to divulge practically any of the product specs. It will be powering the Xbox and Sony's next generation consoles. Let's not forget the PC gaming community has been longing for a high-end competitor to NVIDIA for nearly a decade. I won't go into any of the low-level architecture discussion here, but AMD does like to break down their designs into units, such as shader engines, compute units, and stream processors at a high level. Though many of other factors impact performance, I will be primarily focusing on the compute units for their potential product designs. So let's start with our first leak, and this one comes from a pretty reputable source, the source code provided to the Linux kernel. This code is substantial evidence since both the drivers and the operating system require this type of information to function properly. Given the code's timestamps, mainstream distributions like Ubuntu and Red Hat are likely integrating this information into their verification and regression pipelines. For us, this source confirms a few things, mainly the number of shader engines and compute units that the various Navi designs will deploy. It also verifies a lot of leaks from Moore's Law is Dead and Red Gaming Tech. But let's put all of this into context. In the past, AMD's Vega and Radeon 7 graphics cards are known for their large amount of compute units, and more recently, earlier Navi cards have been less equipped on the low end. Navi 21, also known as Sienna Cichlid? Yeah, Sienna Cichlid, spans that gap in their product stack, while Navi 22 and more recently Navi 23, they shore up AMD's market base with fewer compute units. Now, I still think that there will be a fourth card based on Navi 21, which leans more towards Moore's leaks that there will be a 60-ish CU card. As with any product specification, the thermal design point, or TDP, is a critical design consideration. As we all know, NVIDIA decided to increase their TDPs across the board with Ampere, which has forced other design considerations on their end, beefing up their cooler and integrating a new power connector. Again, the rumor mill with AMD's cards is that RDNA2 cards will be more power efficient, which is awesome. Now, I'm going to lean also on leaks again from Moore's Law is Dead here, and I believe the 6900 XT's target is going to be a 300 watt TDP, while the Navi 22 card will stay close to around 200 watts. Again, putting this all into context, the Radeon 7 TDP is 295 watts, and the 5700 XT was right at 225, so I think all of these targets are a pretty solid determination. AMD states that the RDNA2 will have a 50% performance per watt increase compared to the RDNA generation, or so their marketing department claims. I'll throw a card at the top right with the link if you need that explanation. Pause the video, check it out, because it is essential going forward. Using the 5700 XT and the 5500 XT as a baseline, I calculated the theoretical performance per watt, and I fed it to these new Navi 2 designs. I also figured a performance per CU and watts per CU value because it's going to help keep our heads on a straight level when we're going forward. Now, you might be saying to yourself, Turk, you are full of how can you possibly come up with this stuff? And to that, I say we already have some RDNA2 cards on the market, and that's the next generation consoles. Both Microsoft and Sony have provided us with their consoles' performance, and usually TDP ranges for consoles are typically between 150 and 200 watts. You know, I referenced Tech Power-Ups pages here, which could be entirely incorrect, but calculating the same parametrics with these consoles, our Navi 2 cards are not that far from these specifications. Let me explain. Xbox Series X is arguably the best console from a hardware perspective, and it makes sense that their 52CU GPU will have a lower clock speed, a higher TDP, and thus lower watts per CU. Also, 12 teraflops seems reasonable given Microsoft's performance claims. Going the other way though, the Series S is shooting for the bare minimum with reduced compute units, frequency, and a lower TDP. Now, PlayStation aims for optimization this time, and their 36CU design pushes the CU configuration as well as frequency while maintaining an aggressive power target through its use of Smart Shift. Putting this entire GPU lineup side by side, our leaked information lines up and follows these same principles. Higher CU cards, such as the 6900 XT, will require more power, they will have lower frequencies, and result in potentially higher performance. Navi 22 seems to aim for a 5700 XT style offering, and consequently provides iterational improvements over its older cousin. Taking into account our power parametrics, historical implementations, and taking reasonable leaks into account, I feel comfortable to say that the 6900 XT will come in at a modest 17.25 teraflops, and the 6700 XT will come in right at 11.5 teraflops. For what it's worth, either of these values could go down or up once we know more information about the TDP, actual performance per watt, and of course, official statements from AMD. Also in red on this table, I listed some of my best guesses for memory configuration, bus bandwidth, and game, not boost clock speeds, that go in line with everything that's come through the leaks. Fortunately for this video, I'm not too concerned with these values, and we will of course get specifics in due time. I've covered similar topics like this in the past. You should check out my relative performance video about the RTX 3080 and the RTX 3070, as well as some other console related content on the channel. My methodologies have been very close in the past, particularly my live stream validating NVIDIA's Doom Eternal 4K preview. But today, we're doing it again. Let's show that that top-tier Navi 21 has what it takes to compete with NVIDIA's flagship gaming card. But before we do that, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon down below. I want to verify my assumptions here, and I can't do that unless companies provide me with samples. Your support gets me there, and I appreciate it. Now, let's do this. Special shout out to Hardware Unboxed for allowing me to use their data for comparison purposes. Their analysis of RTX 3000 and previous cards makes all of this possible. We have to dig deep into the GPU selection for our work today because we have to prove both historical performance across GPU generations as well as competitor performance. For that, with AMD, we need the Vega 64, Radeon 7, and both of their 5700 series cards. For NVIDIA, we need to go all the way back to the 1080 Ti, 2070 Super, 2080 Super, 2080 Ti, and both of the latest 3000 series release cards. Now, I've compiled as many of the games as I could, but for visualization, I'm going to be showing Microsoft's Flight Simulator, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, Shadow the Tomb Raider, F1 2020, Doom Eternal, and I'll also be using Steve's 14 game averages for both 1440p and 4K. Taking a look at 1440p and the AMD cards, we see some pretty solid trends. The previous high CU card, the Vega and the Radeon 7, they perform well on their own merits, but the RDNA2 cards with fewer compute units operate right in line with their ancestors. Bumping up to 4K, we do see these margins spread just a little bit, but again, the gameplay performance trend shows that, historically, AMD's designs have been getting better and more efficient. Going a step further, let's create a new metric, teraflops per frame. This metric shows how efficient a given design is when requiring the product to convert raw computational horsepower to frames per second. Again, this is going to be based on the game. I'm not lumping all this together. Looking at both resolutions is proof positive of our previous claims that AMD's designs are improving efficiency. Let's pivot to NVIDIA. At 1440p and 4K, we see predictable performance improvements that are no surprise considering generation on generation and card-to-card improvements. However, once we factor in teraflops, the story changes dramatically. While the 1000 and 2000 series cards appear to be very similar in efficiency across the games and the resolutions, the RTX 3000 series requires a substantial increase in teraflop performance for arguably marginally better frame rates. This is AMD's edge. Now, some assumptions for the 6900 XT. We've already discussed our 17.5 teraflop performance earlier, and that value can shift depending on performance per watt as well as the TDP for the card. Next, given the trend, one might assume that RDNA2 will require even less power at a given performance level to produce a particular game experience. That's that teraflop per FPS value. Rather than not completely stack the deck, I added 10% more teraflop per FPS to compensate for their best card not being that efficient. This value will scale the next chart as appropriate, so if you think I'm a little too optimistic here, feel free to shift the FPS line down on your own. I've also performed this analysis on the RTX 3070 as well, so let me know in the comments if you want to see that data. But for now, let's see what the 6900 XT can do. To reduce clutter, we're only going to be looking at each company's top-tier gaming card for the past generation. No shock, the 5700 XT is outclassed by the 2080 Ti and the RTX 3080. But thanks to the RTX 3080 requiring so much more teraflops and AMD's alleged efficiency improvements, the RX 6900 XT, or whatever it's called, trades blows with the 3080 and ends up 5 FPS below the 3080 with the 14-game average score. You heard me right, 5 frames per second. But 4K is where NVIDIA's card is meant to run, and NVIDIA definitely hits their target. But let's be honest here, the 6900 XT performs admirably compared to the 2080 Ti, which also gives credence to previous leaks that it would be on par with the 2080 Ti. Again, you can shift this line up if you think our performance per watt spec is too low, or slide it down if you believe our teraflop calculation is overly optimistic. I think that the figures used in these calculations are realistic, given the current information on hand in both historical and competing cards' performance. And this begs the question, AMD, can you really wait until October 28th to give us official information, or will the product leaks in the Radeon chip force another Xbox-like Series S announcement? When people were leaking data and they just went onto Twitter and was like, you know what, this is the performance. I know many people are chomping at the bit for Zen 3, but given the alleged performance in this video, I think it's time to capitalize on NVIDIA's rushed RTX 3080 and 3090 launch and get yourself in front of consumers. You just need to provide the information and keep your supply chain in check. The ball is in your court. Now guys, what do you think? Does what we've come up with today line up with your interpretation of the current leaks? Let me know down in the comments. If you agree with what's said here, share this video. The more support you can show the channel, the more likely I'm going to be able to validate these claims and give you guys fresh content. And by the way, my community at Twitch, we went over this data all last week. And if you want to be part of the conversation, check me out at twitch.tv/theturk and join our Discord. Again, thanks guys for watching. Have a good one.